Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. Welcome aboard, all you folks that are watching me stream live here on Facebook, and also big shout out to all of the listeners on the Radio US, now streaming live in 118 countries. That's pretty damn impressive, right? Thanks for all of your support, for tuning in, and for sharing us with your friends. Thank you again. Okay, so got to give those shout outs to all those fantastic sponsors out there. Thank you so much to Big Time Vapes at 711 Memorial Boulevard in Picayune, Mississippi. There you will find all of the gear, supplies, and e-juices that you could ever dream of, and some Langyap in there too. Hey Susie, hey Leanne, good to see you girls joining in this evening. Also to Wrought Ink, yeah, those are the guys that make those crazy New Orleans or Louisiana Urban Legend t-shirts. You can find them, as well as all of my other sponsors, at authorlyngibson.com. Click on the sponsor tab, go shop, discount codes there. I believe it's Horror Queen. Get you 10% off at their store, so check them out. That's Wrought Ink. Also, welcome aboard. Use Basic Racing. I know I'm just tearing that up, but if you have a hot rod and you need parts, go to You Basic. You can also find their link at my website and get a nice little discount there. The code is also mentioned. Racer Direct as well. Thank you so much for all of your support throughout the years. And of course, there's always one of my favorites, Naked Wines. Thank you so much for being a part of my daily life. That's so awesome right there. Hey, you too, sweetheart. I am still struggling a little bit, so you guys bear with me. It's getting better, but life sucks right now. But it's all good. It's all getting better, and I'm starting to feel a little bit better. So bear with me, because I'm sure I'm going to stumble a few times this evening. I'll laugh at myself, and y'all can laugh along with me. So a little bit out of my wheelhouse tonight, but this is by request. And I told you guys, if you have any requests, that I'll certainly dig into the topic, and we'll do a stream on it. So definitely am doing that this evening. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm into big, hairy critters, just big hairy critters of a different sort. So, what the hell is a Yeti, right? Not the cup. Everybody knows what the Yeti cup is. Everybody on the planet has one and all that good stuff. No, I'm talking about a big, creepy critter that's got a reputation that lasts forever. He's been around for years and years and years, eons and stuff. Good to see you. Hey Glenn, Miss Char Harden is in the house, and there's my girl Karen Mathis. That's another one I need to give a big shout out to. She is doing a fantastic job with the Twisted Southern Horror Queen Horde group page. There's all kinds of crazy posts that she puts up. I learn a lot of stuff from Karen. She's awesome, and I love her very much. My twisted sister Wanda Heron, thank you so much for tuning in. My beautiful Aunt Wanda there in Pearl River County, Mississippi. Glenn said he loves my posts with Kane. Yeah, Kane is a character. That's another little hairy critter. He's not so little, 74 pounds. Yes, we just had him weighed, a year old, 74 pounds. How'd you like to feed that baby? Glenn, my big brother, is in the house this evening. There's John Biggins. Thank you so much for tuning in, boys. And Ed Miller, another one of my favorite buddies. Oh, he says there's a car out there in the Czech Republic called a Yeti. But it's not big and hairy, I'm quite certain, Ed. Okay, so like we were saying, what the hell is a Yeti? Well, this critter is actually known by a whole bunch of different names. Now, in the Himalayas, they call it a Métis, which loosely translates to bare and rocky place. Now, there's a laundry list of other names that this guy is referred to in that region, and this little redneck girl is not even going to try to pronounce those words, but the translations are pretty cool. Some of them translate into something along the lines of man bear or cattle bear, and others translate into things along the lines of jungle man or wild man. And we all know a wild man. We all got one or two of those in our life, right? In Russia, they call him the Chichuna, and he's said to hang out in Siberia. Now, this dude in particular is described as being 6 to 7 feet tall, and he's covered with dark hair. And according to accounts from the local nomadic tribes, it's a very well-built Neanderthal-like man that looks like he's wearing pelts, and he has these white patches of fur on his forearms. And they say in that region that this critter here eats human flesh. In Western culture, he's commonly referred to as the Abominable Snowman. Here he's also described as an ape-like creature that's similar to what we know here in North America as Bigfoot. Yes, Bigfoot. I think they're all cousins. Now, how in the hell they got spread out all across the planet, I have no idea. Maybe we can blame Noah and his ark for that. Yeah, damn, he's getting big, Glenn. Definitely, and he ain't through yet. So, like I said a little earlier, this dude's history goes way back, and there's some pretty solid documentation, too. I'm just going to give you, like, the Reader's Digest version of some of the things that I ran across. Starting in 1832, when this dude, James Prinsep, published a journal that included this dude, B.H. Hodgson's account of his experiences in northern Nepal. Nepal is a place where you're going to see pop up more than once, so maybe there's a whole clan of these critters out there. No. But his local guide spotted this tall bipedal creature that was covered in long dark hair that ran away upon being spotted by them. And he, of course, recorded it in writing because they didn't have digital cameras and shit back in the day. In 1899, Lawrence Waddell published his journal, which was written about his experiences in the Himalayas. And he'd heard local tales about this large ape-like creature, but never thought too much about it until he actually ran across some of its footprints. Now, our critter earned the title of the Abominable Snowman in 1921. That's when Lieutenant Colonel Charles Howard Berry led this British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition. And he actually wrote a book about it. And in that book, he included a story about when he crossed the Lac de la at 21,000 feet. That's where he found these footprints that resembled those of a barefooted man in the snow. Not happening up there, right? So his Sherpa guides actually identified those prints as those of the wild man of the snows. That was their little name for the critter at that time. And they referred to it in their native tongue as Meto Kangmi. Now, Meto translates as man bear, and Kangmi translates as snowman. The use of Abominable Snowman began when Henry Newman interviewed some of the folks from the Everest reconnaissance expedition. And the dude Newman actually mistranslated the word meto as filthy. And instead of writing filthy, he substituted that word with the term abominable. So that's where he got his name from. Ronnie and Lori, good to see you guys this evening. Lisa, thank you so much for joining in this tonight. We're talking about big and hairy critters. I guess you've already gathered that much, right? So a little bit later on in 1925, N.A. Tombazi, which is a member of the Royal Geographical Society, wrote that he saw a creature about 15,000 feet near the Zimu Glacier. And he said that he watched this creature for about a good solid minute. And in his description, he says, unquestionably, the figure in outline was exactly like a human being, walking upright and stopping occasionally to pull at some dwarf rhododendron bushes. It showed up very dark against the snow, and as far as I could make out, he says, it wore no clothes. So you got to think back now, 1925, there was no photoshopping or anything along those lines back in the day. So when somebody snaps a picture of something like that, chances are pretty good that's exactly what they saw. About 2 hours later, he and his companions were going down the side of the mountain. They ran across this creature's footprints, and he described them as similar in shape to those of a man, but the prints were undoubtedly those of a biped. And in 1948, this dude, Peter Byrne, also reported finding a Yeti footprint near the Zimu Glacier while he was on vacation from a Royal Air Force assignment. If you notice, all of these people that we're talking about are all very credible, obviously experienced mountain climbers, very reputable people. So it's not like they were out there with a still or something and drinking a little bit of moonshine and seeing this big blurry hairy thing walking around. These people are very credible, so you have to take that into consideration, especially in these times when they're reporting these things, because that was before cameras and video cameras and all that stuff came about. John Biggins, you're absolutely right. If you don't see the comments, I'm not going to clue you in because we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. So by now, folks in the West, we're hearing all these tales about this hairy critter. And in the 50s, this dude named Eric Shipton decides he's going to check out Mount Everest. Well, while he's climbing up, he runs across a bunch of large human-like footprints in the snow at about 20,000 feet. And he actually took pictures because they had cameras in the 50s, right? In 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary and his buddy Tenzing Norgay found very large footprints while they were climbing Mount Everest as well. Now, Hillary would later discount Yeti reports as unreliable. In his first autobiography, Tenzing said that he believed the Yeti was a large ape. And although he had never seen it himself, his father had seen one twice. I don't know what in the hell an ape would be doing at 20,000 feet on Mount Everest, but everybody is entitled to their opinion, right? Now, during the Daily Mail Snowman expedition in 1954, just a little after this, John Angelo Jackson made the first trek from Everest to Kanzenjunga. I'm sure I said that wrong, but apparently it's another really big mountain. And guess what he runs across? This dude actually finds and photographs symbolic paintings of the Yeti in a cavern. Caveman art, folks. Okay, so the dude's been around for a while. Obviously, they didn't have cameras back then either, but they could draw and paint what they saw, right? So he also tracked and photographed a whole lot of the footprints that he found in the snow. Now, a lot of these footprints were identifiable. He was able to pick out what critters had made those footprints. However, there were some very large humanoid footprints which he could not identify. A couple years after that, on March 19th in 1954, the Daily Mail prints this article about some expedition teams that had obtained some hair specimens from what was said to be a Yeti scalp found in the Pangboche Monastery. Now, the hairs were black to dark brown in color in dim light, but if you took them out in the sunlight and looked at them, they were kind of fox red. The hair was analyzed by a Professor Frederick Wood Jones, who was an expert in human and comparative anatomy. Now, during this study, the hairs were bleached, they were cut into sections, and they were all analyzed microscopically, and I'm sure in a whole bunch of different ways, using a whole bunch of different techniques and stuff. Now, the research consisted of taking these micro photographs of the hairs and comparing them with hairs from known animals like bears and orangutans. Well, Jones concluded that the hairs were not actually from a scalp. He contended that while some animals do have a ridge of hair that extends from the pate to the back, that no animals have a ridge running from the base of the forehead across the pate and ending at the nape of the neck. Now, Jones was unable to identify what kind of animal the hairs did come from, but he was able to confirm that they were not from an ape or a bear. So, in 1957, this dude, Tom Slick, funds a new mission to investigate all these Yeti reports. And in 1959, they hit the shit. Literally. These guys collected what they assumed was Yeti poop. Yeah. So the kicker was that once it was analyzed, they did discover that there was some kind of parasite in this poop that could not be classified. It had never been seen before. So that kind of make you scratch your head and go, Yeah, Ed probably did. Ed Miller says it's a shame the bleaching probably ruined the DNA, but hang tight on that thought. You and John are getting just a little bit ahead of me, but y'all, we're on that same link, so that's a good thing. So now the government gets involved. The United States government was taking defining a Yeti so seriously that they came up with some actual guidelines. And among these guidelines were, first, you must obtain a Nepalese permit to search for the Yeti. Second, do not harm the Yeti except in self-defense. And third, let the Nepalese government approve any news reporting on this animal's discovery. But they seemed to turn a blind eye in 1959 because that's when actor James Stewart was visiting India. And when he left there, he smuggled the Pangboche hand, which was the same sample that the hair sample, which they thought was scalp, came from. Yeah, he sticks it in his luggage and takes it back to London with it. So, yeah, definitely it was okay because it was James Stewart that did that, right? So in 1970, our little beastie was spotted by British mountaineer Don Williams while he was scaling the Annapurna. These are a whole lot of sightings and recorded information and now evidence. So maybe leaning towards the Yeti being a real thing? Possibly. In 1983, Himalayan conservationist Daniel C. Taylor and Himalayan natural historian Robert L. Fleming Jr. led a Yeti expedition into Nepal's Byrne Valley. And they didn't really have any luck there, but they did record several eyewitness encounters that had been experienced by the locals. If I recall correctly, one of these tales, the individual that told about his experience actually bore wounds from an encounter with a Yeti. In 2004, Henry G., editor of the journal Nature, mentioned the Yeti in an article stating that the topic deserves further study. He said that the discovery that Homo floresiens survived until very recently, and in geological terms, makes it more likely that stories of other human-like creatures such as Yetis are founded on grains of truth. Remember those cave drawings, right? In early December 2007, Joshua Gates and his team, Destination Truth, reported finding a series of footprints in the Everest region of Nepal resembling descriptions of the Yeti. Each of these footprints measured 13 inches in length and 9.8 inches across with 5 toes. So they made casts of these prints for further research. And the footprints were examined by Jeffrey Meldrum of Idaho State University, who believed them to be too morphologically accurate and to be fake or man-made. But later in 2009, Gates presented hair samples with a forensic analysis concluding that the hair contained an unknown DNA sequence. How about that, Ed Miller? Because he didn't bleach his sample, he just tested it. So, again, what the hell is this critter? Well, in my research on this, science is kind of drilling it into society's head that what we think is some kind of obscure bipedal man beast is nothing more than the evolution of what they call a tree bear. And they're saying that this is a bear that has developed a digit kind of like our thumb so it can have an opposable grip. Do I buy that? Not really. There's just way too many ramblings of bipedal creatures all around the world, not to mention the fact that if this were a product of evolution, why the hell were there cave dwellings of this guy, right? Or cave drawings in the, you got me, in the cavern of this guy, right? Yeah, you little Neanderthals were out there sketching their cousin. Freddy is out there in the field again, and somebody really needs to put some cornrows in that hair because he's just waving in the wind. Glenn Harrison said he's written about those. Glenn is kind of an expert on bipedal critters and cryptoids and cryptids and all that stuff. Like I said at the beginning of the show, this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So I learned some things when I was doing my research. And I got to tell you, I have an inkling that this may actually be a real critter. I don't think that it's a ape. I don't think that it's a bear. I think that it's some kind of a crossbreed, or maybe something that survived from a long time ago, because he lives obviously 20,000 feet up on the top of mountains where people don't really care to live. It may just have something to do with the fact that I was brought up with tales of the Honey Island Swamp Monster. That's right, because I'm here in Louisiana. By the way, you can get a Honey Island Swamp Monster t-shirt from Rod Inc. Go to authorlyngibson.com, use code Horror Queen and get 10% off your order. It's a pretty cool t-shirt. So yeah, that legend, like I said, it has roots in my own family, and it's been around for a long, long time. But it was actually officially documented in 1974. This dude named Harlan Ford was a lucky guy that stumbles across this monster with a camera. And later on, after sharing his photographic evidence with the entire world, he strengthened his case by creating these plaster casts of the beast's footprints. And these casts were absolutely earth-shattering evidence that the Honey Island Swamp Monster was way more than just a legend. So, of course, Ford became very popular. He moved up in status, and as far as folks like a lot of my uncles and grandpas and a lot of the old folks around in Pearl River County, Mississippi, he was a hero, because for years there had been these stories of sightings that circulated around the family dinner table and at the local pubs, and those folks that everybody laughed at and said they were full of shit had finally been vindicated by Harlan's hardcore evidence. So since 1974, there's been a lot of folks that have trekked way deep into the Honey Island Swamp in search of new evidence, and some of them have returned disappointed. Some of them have returned further fueled by their experiences out there, and some of them have never returned at all. There's tons of recordings of this creature's agitated screeches, and if you've ever heard that, go to YouTube and search for it. It doesn't sound like any kind of animal that you would have ever heard. So it's very different, and it will send a chill up your spine. And of course, there have been more people that have gone out there and came back with a lot of plaster cast of footprints that they discovered. I always remember being warned by my dad to never set foot in the Honey Island Swamp. Where we lived, there was a small stretch, about 5 miles before you cross the state line and go into Louisiana. And of course, as a teenager, you're going across the state line to get your liquor for the weekend. And so did everybody else, because Pearl River County was dry. And in between Picayune, Mississippi, and that state line, and right in that same little area, is the Honey Island Swamp. So many kids that were raised up in my generation were always told by their parents, if you break down on that stretch of highway, don't get out of the car, wait for the law to get there, wait for somebody to pick you up, don't go into the swamp, because you will not come back out. We all grew up hearing that, and it was just a fact of life around there. You do not set foot in the Honey Island Swamp. So the folks that have encountered our critter here in Louisiana, they say that he's in excess of 7 feet tall, and these plaster casts are about 12 inches long, suggesting that that height truly is possible. And those that have witnessed this monster firsthand describe him as being a very hairy beast with yellow eyes, and when the monster is anywhere near you, you smell him because he stinks, Ed Miller. I don't know if it's because he's way up on the mountain, it's really cold, and he doesn't get sweaty up there, but the legends from those areas, or the tales from those areas, they never mention that stench. But it seems like the further down south you get here in the northern or North America, that you hear that tale about the stench that comes along with it. This tale right here in particular, Glenn Harrison hooked me up with. I hadn't heard of it until the other day when I was kind of rolling the idea of doing the Yeti stream to him, because I knew he was going to know something about a legend that he could hook me up with, and he did. So what about the Boggy Creek Monster? Now, this dude was first spotted in Folk, Arkansas back in 1834. And he was being described as between 7 and 8 feet tall and around 300 pounds. And of course, he's covered in long, thick, dark hair. In the 1900s, sightings around Folk became even more frequent. So obviously, he's breeding with something, right? So these residents are spotting this monster off and on, and actually there were 40 recorded spottings or sightings in 1997 alone. And it's been suggested that this animal is nocturnal, but there was one hunter that reported sighting one in broad daylight in the Sulphur River Wildlife Area, which is near Folk, and that went down in the year 2000. There's even been a few films that's based on encounters with this dude. So the first one that was released in 1973, of course, is The Legend of Boggy Creek. And it's said to be based off of a true story, which was an encounter that was had by Bobby and Elizabeth Ford. Now, the Fords claimed that this monster attacked their home late on the night of May 1st. And Elizabeth said that it actually reached through her screen window, but it got chased away by Bobby and Dan, his brother, who had just got home from a hunting trip. So luckily they all had their weapons there, and they were ready to go after this big dude. So they did, but after they came home and settled back down, this critter comes back. It was a little bit after midnight, and he was kind of pissed. I guess his pride was hurt, so he throws Bobby to the ground and kind of roughs him up a little bit, and they take Bobby to St. Michael Hospital in Texarkana, and that was where he was treated for having these massive gashes across his back. How's that for some pretty concrete evidence, y'all? Of course, they said he was suffering from mild shock when he arrived, and that was written in one of the local newspapers, because there were several papers that were there to get his story from his eyewitness account, because of course this critter was all about everything. Everybody was talking about him, just like the Honey Island Swamp Monster when we were growing up. Everybody knew about this critter, so there were several newspapers and reporters that were covering it, and they just went ape shit when they heard about this dude getting roughed up by one, and he was in the hospital. He obviously wasn't going to get away from them, so they could get a story from him. So they said that there were no traces of blood that were found at the Ford's home, but they did find these massive footprints all around the outside of the house, and there were also scratches on the porch and the siding, and there next to the window that was damaged that it reached through, so Elizabeth said. So a lot of these sightings are kind of dated. Kind of makes you wonder if this big guy's still around. So I looked into it a little bit and said he needs some Axe body spray. He needs something. So yeah, I did. I looked into it a little bit and wanted to see if there was anything more recent. And guess what, folks? Yes, there is. There's a few things here I wanted to tell you about that kind of stood out to me. June 22nd, 2009. At around 6:30 p.m., this 19-year-old college kid's driving on this curvy back road near Rhinebeck, New York. And he swerved to miss this thing that he sees in the road. And he said what it was a shopping bag that contained, for some odd reason, an open cereal box and a small log. So after he passes by it, he glances in his rearview mirror and he sees someone or something running back behind his car to go and grab that bag. So a second later, he's like, I got to see what the hell's going on with this. So he turns his car around, and he gets about a 3 or 4 second glimpse of something walking on 2 feet about 50 feet away. And what he described was this creature that was between 7 and 7.5 feet tall, covered with black hair, with these broad, muscular shoulders and long arms that swung kind of oddly with their palms facing upward. Sounds like a Yeti to me, huh? At about 1:30 on the morning of January 8, 2008, this big rig driver was hauling a load of potatoes on I-15 just outside St. George, Utah. And he's downshifting because he's heading down an incline. And it's starting, you know, when you go down a hill, especially in the middle of the night, fog starts getting really heavy the lower you go. So the driver looks up and he sees something standing on the side of the road with glowing eyes. And at first he thought it could be a deer. So he switches on his high beams, hoping this deer wasn't going to run out in front of him. And what he saw was not a deer. He saw this gigantic creature running across the road from left to right with these massive strides. So later on, he kind of estimated that this creature was probably around 8 feet tall and 500-600 pounds. He said it had long black hair, big eyebrows and long, lanky arms that were proportionately longer than a human's. For a moment, it kind of turned its head and stared at him as he was coming up on it. And the driver swerved a little bit much to avoid hitting this creature, which almost caused him to crash his truck. But fortunately, by the time he regained control of the vehicle, when he managed to roll to a stop, he looks back, and of course, our hairy critter was gone. Again, here's another one. It was about 6:15 on the morning of September 1st, 2009, and this chick was commuting to a job in Rifle, Colorado. She's feeling a little bit groggy that morning. Maybe she had, I don't know, a little bit too much naked wine that evening. And she figures that before she goes through Independence Pass, that she was going to pull her truck over to the side of the road and get a little bit of fresh air. So she pulls over, she gets out of the truck, she's looking around, and she sees something moving around in the meadow directly ahead of her. Now, at first she thought it might be a bear, but then the creature stood up on two legs, and she saw that it had two arms that hung to its side just like a person. She also added that it was massive, and it was covered in this long cinnamon-colored fur. Of course, she saw it in daylight, and they say that when you see the Yeti's hair in daylight, that it kind of looks reddish, like a fox. On October 23rd, 2010, at about 7:15 a.m., a hunter parked his ATV on a trail and quietly made his way into the woods, hoping to make it to his favorite clearing without spooking any of the deer. As he's walking, he sees this massive animal walking about 10 yards ahead of him on the trail. And he said that this animal seemed to cover about 15 to 20 feet in just 2 strides, and it made no noticeable noise. That's a big critter to move that quickly with that kind of a stride, making no noise. The hunter clicked on his flashlight, and he said what he saw made his hair stand on end. He said this creature was between 7 and 7.5 feet tall, and he estimated that it weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 pounds. It was very muscular. It was covered with dark fur, with very long arms and a slight hunched posture. The dude said that he had seen enough bears in his lifetime to know that that positively was not a bear. In the swamps of Florida, Bigfoot's known by a very different name. They call him the skunk ape over there because of the appalling smell. He needs some Axe spray, right, Ed Miller? Yeah, definitely. They say this critter stinks. So one morning in May of 2011, this fishing guide's using a pole, and he's pulling his flatboat through a mangrove swamp, and he's got his 2 clients with him, and one of these clients is a commercial pilot, and the other is an attorney. Very credible sources, right? Well, they look up and they spot something on the shore about 100 yards away from them. And at first, the guide thought it might be a feral hog or maybe a bear. But as the boat got closer, the creature turned and stood up on 2 legs to look at them. The guide estimated the apparent skunk ape was about as wide as a side-by-side refrigerator, with a very muscular torso and a ZZ top kind of beard and a hairless forehead. The creature stared at him for about 15 seconds and then made some kind of guttural snort and walked away into the mangroves. Apparently, they had disturbed his breakfast. Bigfoot also paid a visit to a Blackstone, Virginia man and his son in the early morning hours of May 3rd, 2011. And that morning they hear this loud noise outside their house, so the man grabs his pistol, the son snatches up his shotgun, they go outside figuring they're going to see either a burglar or a bear. Well, instead, they were confronted by this 8-foot-tall, hair-covered humanoid creature running toward them from the woods. Now, the man screamed at the creature to stop, and he told his son to shoot, which he did, into the air. And the creature just kind of shrieked at him, but kept running straight toward him. And he got within 15 feet of him. So these dudes haul ass back inside their house, and the critter runs back into the woods. Well, they also reported that Bigfoot really stunk, and that he left footprints that were 18 to 20 inches long, which were later photographed by investigators that came out to file a report. So those are pretty recent reports. Now, one thing I want to add to this is the whole bear scenario. We don't really have bears down here in southeastern Louisiana. If we do, they're called honey bears, and they don't get very big. And they certainly, if they stand on their back legs, they come right back down because that's not what they're made for. They're little fat, waddly, small bears. We don't have those here. So, what other critter could there be in southeast Louisiana that could even resemble a Honey Island swamp monster? Nothing. We don't have apes, we don't have gorillas, we don't have orangutans, we don't have bears. We have the Honey Island swamp monster. Now, granted, in Arkansas, possibly bears, but if you remember, all of these accounts were from very credible sources, avid hunters. They definitely know the difference between a bear and a skunk ape, or whatever the case may be, whatever you want to call this big, hairy, stinky critter. So yeah, do I think that there's such a thing as a Yeti, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Boggy Creek monster? Yeah, I do. I think there's something out there because, you know, nobody's going to live in the Honey Island swamp. There's still sections of that swamp in particular that have not been charted, maybe by satellite, but yeah, you don't know what's out there. Same thing with the Everglades in Florida. There's spots out there that people don't go into, and if they did, they might not ever come back. Do they get lost? Do these big water snakes eat them, or is it a Bigfoot or Sasquatch? I don't know. We may never know, unless somebody actually catches one of these big guys and brings him in, which I hope never happens because they obviously don't need to be held captive. But I'm going to ignore one of those comments. Someone's comparing Bigfoot and Sasquatch to my sister-in-law, and could be. But no, Sasquatch does not speak English, and my sister-in-law, she does. She's got that southern drawl. I don't think I've ever heard of a of a Bigfoot or a Honey Island swamp monster. So dinner's ready, y'all. Okay, so hopefully, Casey says, with so many footprints and smell, has anyone ever tried to track one of these creatures? They have to be down somewhere. I agree with you. They got to live somewhere. They don't live in trees, and even if they did, somebody would have tracked one somewhere. So I don't know. Obviously, they're very intelligent because they are around. There's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of proof. There's plenty of sightings. There's plenty of documentation. They're here. They're smart enough just to avoid mankind, I would think. And there's a lot of days I'd like to avoid mankind. I know you all feel the same. I'll watch your Facebook posts. All right, folks, so I hope I didn't stumble too much through our Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Skunk Ape, Boggy Creek Monster episode. I do take requests. I love getting requests, especially on new topics, which if there's anything in the paranormal world that I haven't written on or done a little bit of research on, that would thrill me. But if there are any topics that you want to hear about here in the future, inbox me. You can email me at authorlynnGibson.com. That's Lynn with one N if you're out there listening in Radio Land. Or you can message me on Facebook at Southern Horror Queen. I would love getting more requests, love doing research on new topics. Like I said, this is something that I am not used to, the cryptids, but hey, I'm into it. It's all good. I like creepy. Maybe it's like a werewolf where people turn. That is a awesome theory, John, because we do have werewolves here. We have the Rougarou. So, very good point. John Biggins is on it tonight, you guys. That's a thought. I got to think about that. So, anyway, Glenn Harrison is chiming in, says, no shortage of reports and or shelters. I did read something about that. I believe it was in Nepal, one of the expeditions. It was not one of the first ones. It was one where some of these guys went back to check out the areas where people had written in their journals, and they'd published having sightings and finding footprints. And they did say that they found all kinds of strange shelters, but they weren't on the ground. They were like up in the trees. Not nests, but I forgot exactly what they referred to them to. I really wish they had drawn some illustrations or something. It was obviously something before the 1950s. Would love to see that. Obviously, Glenn is all over it, and he he knows all about it. So maybe he'll write us a report on that. Urban legends are always fun. Yes, John Biggins, I agree with you. All right, folks, so that is it for me for the evening. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining in. Hope that you all have a wonderful week. Remember to go to authorlynnGibson.com. Check out my books, my blogs, and all my awesome sponsors. They'd be happy to hear from you. Love you guys, and thank you again. Don't forget to send me those requests. Y'all have a wonderful evening.